So last night at the Beatles concert slash Q&A, it really was a great time. I've been a Beatles fan since I was about 14 when my uncle introduced me to them, and I think everybody should go through a Beatles phase at some point in their life. They're kind of timeless. So I thought this morning we could talk about another British import that I think is also timeless, and that is, of course, Monty Python. When I was in high school, we used to think we were super cool because my friends and I watched Monty Python on VHS tapes, and we could quote it, from The Holy Grail and The Life of Brian and all those ridiculous comedy sketches. We thought, in a super nerdy way, of course, that we were the coolest because nobody else knew these British comedies and everything. So a few years ago, I was at the National Youth Gathering with some of our youth. This is 20 years later. And so they're all quoting Monty Python and thinking they're all super cool. The same things that we were quoting in high school. They're saying, in all this Monty Python stuff from The Holy Grail and all those other classics. So I came to the conclusion, Monty Python, also timeless. One of my favorite sketches is called You Were Lucky. Does anybody remember it? Yeah, You Were Lucky. A few people, maybe. There are four guys sitting in tuxedos, and they're smoking cigars, and they're saying, well, it's a miracle that we're all here today and looking like this, and our lives are so great because, the first one says, well, I grew up in such a tiny house. And then the second one said, oh, well, you were lucky to have a house. We grew up in a tiny room, all 26 of us. And then the next one says, oh, you were lucky. We grew up in a hallway. And then the fourth one, of course, says, a hallway? We used to dream of a hallway. You were lucky. We lived in a hole in the ground covered by a tarpaulin. And it goes on, and they're saying, you were so lucky. And it's this game of sort of one-downmanship. And I was thinking, we all have that friend. We all have that person that when we tell a story, maybe about something crazy we did in high school or something like that, or how we used to rebel or how bad we used to be as a kid, we have that friend's like, oh, that's nothing. Let me tell you my story about that. And I want to offer to you that if you don't have that friend, maybe you are that friend. It's okay. I've been there. We've all, we have a really good story sometimes that is a lot better, right? We can all say, well, that's nothing. I was even worse than that. So it came to me that the Apostle Paul is the ultimate story topper. He's the ultimate of one-downmanship, and you can see it all throughout his writings. There's even a hashtag for this now. It's called humble brag. And the Apostle Paul does this all throughout his writings. He says, there is nobody worse than me. Nobody at all. It's a little bit obnoxious if you start reading it. He says, I threatened the Christians. And I can see, having a conversation with him and him saying, oh, well, that's nothing. You should hear what I did to those Christians. He was that friend who did that, who said, well, that's nothing. I have a much better story than that. And he did, obnoxiously, have one of the best stories, of course. He has the story of when he was on the road to Damascus and lightning came down and actually flashed all around him, and it threw him to the ground, and he heard the voice of Jesus saying, this is Jesus. Don't we all ask for something like that sometimes in our lives? We want that experience of Jesus being that clear, and Paul actually gets it. I find that a little annoying. There was a guy that my husband and I knew because he wasn't a Christian. He was a scientist, actually, but he started to have a lot of questions about Christianity and about Jesus, and our mutual friend sort of threw him to us and said, you're pastors, you deal with him. You answer his questions. And so he said, I've really been sort of asking for a sign, and, I was hit by lightning in my backyard a few weeks ago. We said, what? He had been asking for a sign, and he actually was hit by lightning. He was fine. He was grilling out, and he was thrown about 20 feet and landed on his knees in his backyard. We were like, that's the kind of thing that maybe you're talking about. And then that's not all. We were in the process of talking to him, and we were, having Bible study at our house and stuff like that for my husband's church, and really fascinating conversations about Jesus and science and belief and all of these things. And he said, well, I've still been asking for a sign. We were like, oh, other than the lightning. And he said, I went to, one of those fancy car wash places, and you guys aren't going to believe this. I got in my car, and there was a sign on my dashboard that said, your car personally washed by Jesus. I'm not making this up. And of course, he went in, it was Jesus, his friendly car washer. He washed his car. Like, we call that a sign. You have an actual sign in your car washed by Jesus. Now, we don't always get that, right? It's the lucky people. It's the people like Paul. It's the people like our friend. And when Paul got it, it was because Paul was going to spread the gospel to all kinds of people, even us here today. Paul needs that kind of confirmation, right? And apparently our friend did too, but we don't always get that. If you have a story like Paul's story, I better already know it. You better be telling it to everyone and their brother and their mom, because that's what stories like that are for. If God's given you an experience like that in your life, I want to see it everywhere, because that's what they're there for. That's why Paul got this experience. But most of us, I think, are a lot more like Ananias. Y'all probably haven't even heard of Ananias. I had to look him up. He's in this story, but what happens to him, I think, is closer to so many of our experiences, but it is no less a miracle what happens to him. If you see this, he doesn't get a lightning bolt, he doesn't get his car washed by Jesus or anything like that. He gets a voice in the middle of the night whispering his name. Just a little bitty voice whispering his name. That's a lot closer to my experience, maybe yours too, than the lightning bolts and the signs and things like that. Sometimes we get a small voice from God whispering our name with a mission for us. Now here's the miracle. Ananias heard his name in the middle of the night and said, "Here I am, Lord." He knew that God had a mission for him, even there in the middle of the night. And when God said, "I want you to go and talk to Saul, I want you to go heal him, he's expecting you," he didn't just say, "Nope." He said, "God, are you serious?" Because this is the person that wants to murder all the Christians. God said, "Yes, I'm serious. I want you to go because he is going to be a really important instrument to me." And apparently God, this small voice in the middle of the night, no lightning bolts, no nothing, just a small voice, was so convincing that Ananias got up in the middle of the night and went to the house where Saul was, healed him, baptized him, and led him on his way to being a disciple. Ananias is a really common name in that society. It's like Joe or Jane disciple. It's like all of us. There are 3 Ananiases in the book of Acts alone. So when you see this, this is a normal person. We don't get the experience of Paul, not all of us. If you do, like I said, you go tell that story everywhere. That's what it's there for. But if you're Joe disciple, Jane disciple, like me, you might have been a Christian all your life. Ananias was probably baptized as a child, as many of us were. We can learn something from his story that's no less miraculous than the lightning bolts and the signs on that road to Damascus. This is what he does in the post-resurrection life. This is what he does after Easter. When God whispers his name, he says, "Here I am." And when God says, "Get up and go," he gets up and he goes. Now you may know, like I know, that's a miracle in our lives. When we get quiet enough to listen to what the voice of God is asking us to do and to go. Because in the middle of our ordinary life and everything that we're dealing with, it's hard to hear without the lightning bolts and the signs and things like that. But I think that's how God speaks to us, like God spoke to Ananias, us Joe and Jane disciples. God speaks to each of us, not necessarily in a lightning bolt. But know, rest assured, even if you are just Joe or Jane disciple, God calls each of us by name. Amen.